I should have known. The night I collapsed on the bathroom floor, gasping for air, I should have known. The hunger, the dizziness, the unbearable exhaustion, I should have known none of it would ever be enough for him. My body was trembling. I had starved myself for 3 days, desperate to see the scale move just a little lower, desperate to see a flicker of admiration in my husband's eyes. But when I stumbled into the living room, weak and disoriented, he barely looked up from his phone. "Are you okay?" he asked, not out of concern, but out of obligation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him I was dying inside. That I had spent years trying to be the woman he wanted, the woman he once claimed to love. But I just nodded and whispered, "I'm fine." Because that's what I had been taught. To be fine. To hold it together. To make sacrifices for the man I loved, even when it broke me. But love shouldn't feel like suffering. And my suffering had only just begun. When I married Lucas, I was never a skinny girl. But I was confident. I was happy. I had curves, I had laughter, I had dreams. And he? He had love in his eyes. At least, that's what I thought. But something changed after marriage. It started with little things, his eyes lingering on women slimmer than me, his offhand comments about portion sizes, his silence when I asked if I looked pretty in a new dress. Then came the jokes. "Babe, maybe we should both hit the gym, starting with you." "Wow, that's a big plate of food. You sure you need all that?" "I just miss the old you." The old me? The old me had never existed. He had just never truly seen me before. So I started changing. For him. I tried everything. Diets, fasting, waking up at 4 a.m. for workouts that left me breathless. I spent money on slimming teas, waist trainers, appetite suppressants. I counted every calorie, swallowed my tears when the scale barely moved. And when I did lose weight, I thought it would make him love me again. I was wrong. Please subscribe. The weight melted, but so did my joy. The more I shrank, the more distant he became. Nothing changed. If anything, he seemed more annoyed. More frustrated. One evening, I dressed up in a tight black dress, excited to show him my progress. My ribs were showing. My collarbones were sharp. I had become the woman he wanted, hadn't I? But when I stepped into the room, his reaction shattered me. His eyes flickered over me, unimpressed. You look different. Not beautiful. Not stunning. Just different. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing the bitter truth. It was never about my weight. It was about him. He had stopped loving me long before I stopped loving myself. The breaking point came on our wedding anniversary. I had made reservations at his favorite restaurant, worn the most flattering dress I owned, even practiced how I would smile when I saw him. But Lucas never showed up. I waited for an hour, then 2. My calls went straight to voicemail. When I got home, I found him in the living room, casually scrolling through his phone. "Where were you?" My voice was shaking. He barely looked up. "Oh, I forgot." Forgot? Our anniversary? The night I had spent weeks preparing for? I felt something inside me snap. "Lucas, do you even love me anymore?" I whispered. He sighed, like he was exhausted from my existence. "I don't know, Emily. Maybe I just miss being excited about you." Excited. Like I was a toy he had grown tired of. Like I was a thing, not a person. I turned and walked away, tears burning down my face. But this time, I wasn't crying because I felt unloved. I was crying because, for the first time, I was done fighting for him. I didn't expect to meet someone else. I didn't even think I was ready. But love has a way of finding you when you least expect it. His name was Sylvester. He wasn't a stranger. I had known him from work. But I never noticed how kind he was, how deeply he listened, how he saw me in a way Lucas never had. One evening, as we worked late, I made a self-deprecating joke about my body, something Lucas would have laughed at. But Sylvester frowned. "Why do you talk about yourself like that?" he asked. I shrugged. "It's just the truth." He shook his head. "No, it's not. You're beautiful. And you don't need to change for anyone." I wanted to laugh it off, but something in his eyes made me pause. He wasn't just saying it to be nice. He meant it. For the first time in years, I felt seen. And that was the moment I realized, love is not something you should have to earn. I moved out 2 weeks later. Lucas didn't fight for me. At first. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I'd come crawling back, begging to be chosen again. But I never did. And that's when he panicked. The calls started. Then the texts. Then the desperate voice notes. Emily, I miss you. Let's talk. I made mistakes, but I love you. I swear, I do. One day, he showed up at my new apartment. He looked different, less sure of himself, less arrogant. You look amazing, he whispered. I smiled. I know. Because now, I wasn't losing weight to be loved. I was just happy. And for the first time in years, I knew I deserved a love that didn't require me to shrink. We can fix this, Emily, he begged. We can start over. But there was nothing left to fix. Because I had finally found someone who didn't need me to change. And I wasn't going back. Before my heart knew heartbreak, before love became a battlefield of sacrifice and suffering, there was only us. Me. Lucas. And a world that celebrated everything we were. Back then, I was Emily Williams, the golden girl of Climax School of Science. It wasn't just that I was beautiful, I was powerfully beautiful. The kind of beauty that made people pause. The kind that wasn't just about my face but the way I carried myself, the way I spoke, the way I existed. I was tall, strikingly tall for a girl of my age, with flawless brown skin that glowed under the sun, full, curvy hips that made my school uniform hug my body in a way that made the other girls jealous. I had thick, black hair, neatly styled into elegant cornrows, and my eyes, sharp, intelligent, always searching for the next challenge, made me unforgettable. And I wasn't just a beauty. I was brilliant. My parents, one of the wealthiest in the city, had ensured I had the best of everything: education, exposure, and an unshakable confidence. My wardrobe was a collection of expensive, well-fitted dresses that made me stand out. Even in my school uniform, you could tell I wasn't like the others. The teachers adored me. The students worshipped me. The boys wanted me, and the girls wanted to be me. But in all of Climax School of Science, in a sea of admirers and desperate suitors, my heart belonged to just one person. Lucas. Lucas wasn't like the others. He was tall, but painfully skinny, the kind of skinny that made people assume he didn't eat well at home. He wore his uniform neatly, but it was obvious that it had been patched in some places. His shoes were always polished, but the soles were worn thin. Unlike me, he didn't come from wealth. He wasn't popular. He wasn't particularly handsome in the way other boys were. But he was brilliant. The most brilliant science student in the entire school. I first noticed him when we both stood on the podium at the end-of-year prize-giving ceremony. I had just won Miss Climax, for the third year in a row. The entire hall was chanting my name, the teachers smiling with approval, the principal personally placing the glittering crown on my head. Please subscribe. Then, moments later, Lucas's name was called. He won Best Science Student. Best in Mathematics. Best in Physics. Best in Chemistry. Best in Biology. Prize after prize after prize. He was unstoppable. And for the first time, I saw him smile. It wasn't the smile of a boy who was used to attention. It was the smile of a boy who had only ever competed with himself. That night, as I adjusted my crown and prepared to go home, I found myself glancing at him. He was sitting alone in a corner of the hall, stacking his books and medals into his school bag while the other boys laughed and chatted loudly among themselves. Something about him fascinated me, and I didn't understand why. Days later, during prep time in the science laboratory, I saw him again. He was at his usual spot, scribbling in his notebook, eyes focused, lips slightly pursed in thought. I had come to pick up my own notes, but before I could leave, something made me pause. Lucas, I called. He looked up, startled, as if surprised that I, Emily Williams, the school's reigning queen, was talking to him. Yes? He said hesitantly. I walked up to him, sat beside him, and before he could react, I placed my biology textbook on the table. Explain this to me. It wasn't that I didn't understand the topic, but something inside me wanted to hear him explain it. I wanted to see his mind work. And he did. With so much patience, so much passion. That was the first time we studied together. And from that moment, it became a routine. Emily, the most admired girl in school. Lucas, the smartest boy in school. Our friendship became unbreakable. At first, it was purely academic. We read together, prepared for exams together, challenged each other in ways no one else could. But somewhere in between the books and equations, something else started growing. I felt it in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. The way his voice softened when he spoke to me. The way my heart raced whenever he leaned close to explain a difficult topic. But he never said anything. And neither did I. My mother was the first to sense it. One evening, as I was dressing up for school, she walked into my room, holding a beautifully wrapped package. "Take this," she said, handing it to me. "For who?" I asked. She smiled knowingly. "Your husband." I gasped. "Mummy." She laughed. "Oh, don't act surprised. Everybody in school knows Lucas is your person. Even your father has noticed. That boy is going places. And I see the way you look at him." I had no words. She placed the package in my hands and whispered, "A smart man is better than a handsome man, my daughter. Love the one who loves your mind." And that was how it started. Every now and then, she would send me with small gifts for him, brand new school shoes, fancy pens, expensive textbooks. Lucas, at first, refused to take them. But my mother was persistent. "Take it, my dear," she told him one day, when she came to pick me up from school. What kind of mother-in-law would I be if I didn't take care of my daughter's husband? I thought Lucas would blush, stammer, laugh awkwardly. But instead, he smiled. And that smile stayed with me long after that day. It was our final year. We were seated on the empty football field after school, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Lucas sighed and looked up at the sky. "Do you ever think about the future, Emily?" I nodded. "Every day." He turned to face me. "And where do you see yourself?" I hesitated, then smiled. "With you." He froze. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Fear that I was joking. Fear that I didn't mean it. But I did. And so, I reached for his hand, squeezed it gently, and whispered, "It's always been you, Lucas. Always." He closed his eyes, took a shaky breath, and when he opened them again, there was nothing but love. And that was the beginning of everything. That evening, the air was cool, and the sky was painted in shades of gold and purple. Lucas and I walked hand in hand along the lonely pathway that led to my house. My fingers were laced through his, and every now and then, he would gently squeeze my hand as if to remind me that we, was real. I felt invincible, beautiful, powerful, loved. The world belonged to us. But we had barely walked past the bend in the road when a shadow stepped out in front of us, blocking our path. Finney. A classmate. A troublemaker. A boy who had been in my shadow for years, watching as I claimed crown after crown, as I walked through school halls with my head high, as I became everything he was not. He stood there, arms crossed, an ugly smirk on his face. And then, in a voice dripping with jealousy, he spat, "Here they come. The almighty couple of Climax School of Science. Strolling all over the place as if the world was created just for them." I felt Lucas stiffen beside me, but I squeezed his hand, signaling him to ignore the mad dog before us. Finney wasn't done. His eyes locked onto me, his face twisted with something dark. "You, Emily," he sneered. "You better not be deceived by the fools calling you beautiful. Maybe they're blind. Or maybe they just don't know the future. But I do." A chill ran down my spine. "Listen," he continued, stepping closer. "I give you just 4 years before your bubble bursts. You'll bloat like a flooded pumpkin. Your beauty will vanish, your charm will fade, and the eyes of everyone will finally open. Including this blind fool holding your hand." I gasped. Finney's eyes shifted to Lucas, and his smirk widened into a cruel grin. "And you, Lucas, the living skeleton. Small rat. Do you think you're carrying a trophy? No. You're carrying a load that will sink you. By the time she's ready for you, you'll think you're living with an Egyptian mummy." My blood boiled. Lucas took a step forward, his hands curling into fists. "Say one more word, and I swear." Slap. The sound echoed in the empty road like a gunshot. Finney had just slapped Lucas. Something inside me snapped. Before I could think, before I could breathe, before Lucas could react, I lunged. I didn't care that I was wearing a dress. I didn't care that I was a girl. I pounced on him. Lucas followed immediately, his fury matching mine. Together, we unleashed hell. Finney hadn't expected it. He had underestimated us. He thought Lucas was weak and that I was too much of a lady to fight. But that day, we proved him wrong. By the time we were done, he was on the ground, groaning in pain. His shirt was torn, his face was swollen, and his confidence was gone. I stood over him, breathing hard, my knuckles burning. "You will regret ever speaking those words," I hissed. I stood over him, breathing hard, my knuckles burning. "You will regret ever speaking those words," I hissed. Lucas pulled me away before I could do more damage. We left him there, lying in the dirt, his own blood staining the ground beneath him. And that was the end of it. Or so we thought. The next morning, Climax School of Science was on fire with gossip. "Did you hear? Emily and Lucas beat Finney yesterday. They said Finney cried like a baby. He didn't even come to school today." I walked into school with my head held high. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't scared. But what shocked me the most was what happened after lunch break. The school principal summoned us. I expected punishment. I expected a lecture. Instead, when we entered his office, we saw Finney's parents. And they were bowing. Apologizing. His father, a tall, muscular man with a booming voice, looked directly at Lucas and me. "I am deeply sorry for my son's behavior. He has been jealous of you two for years. I did not raise him to be a bully." His mother had tears in her eyes. "Please forgive him. He has learned his lesson." Lucas and I exchanged a look. This was the last thing we had expected. The principal sighed. "Emily, Lucas, you both acted in self-defense, but violence is not encouraged in this school. However, I will not punish you. The matter is settled." And just like that, the chapter closed. Or so we thought. What we didn't know was that Finney's curse would come to pass. 4 years later, I would wake up and look in the mirror, and see exactly what he had predicted. The final months of secondary school were supposed to be the most intense, preparing for our West African School Certificate Examination, WAS, and the Joint Admission and Matriculation Board, JAM, exams. Lucas and I had one goal, to pass brilliantly and get into the same university. Please subscribe. We studied late into the night, our heads bent over textbooks, solving past questions as if our lives depended on it. And when the results came out, we both passed in flying colors. Lucas was admitted to study mechanical engineering, and I, pharmacy. It was a dream come true. But before we could leave Climax School of Science behind, one last event would etch my name in its history, the debate. It was during our usual English period when our teacher, Mr. Okoro, walked in with a smug smile. The kind of smile that meant something big was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, placing his hands on his waist, "I bring you great news." We all straightened in our seats. "Our school has been selected to host this year's biggest inter-school debate competition," he continued. "And this time, we are competing against Glory Academy." A murmur of excitement ran through the class. Glory Academy was our rival school, the only school that dared to challenge us in academics. Mr. Okoro let the tension build before dropping the real bombshell. "The topic of the debate is, true or false? Fat ladies are generally more beautiful than thin ladies." The class exploded. Some students laughed. Some gasped. Some began shouting, arguing right there in the classroom before the debate had even started. But I just sat there, frozen. Because suddenly, all eyes turned to me. "Emily!" Someone shouted. "You must be on the team." "Yes. Who else can argue this better than her? She's the prettiest and plumpest girl in school. If anyone should prove that fat women are more beautiful, it's Emily." I felt my cheeks burn. Mr. Okoro grinned. Well, it seems the class has spoken." He turned to me. "Emily, would you do us the honor of leading the team?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say a word, Lucas whispered beside me. "Do it, Emily. You know you're the perfect one for this." I looked into his eyes and saw pride. Slowly, I nodded. "I'll do it." The biggest hall of Climax School of Science was packed to the brim. Students, teachers, parents, even outsiders had gathered, standing by the doors and windows, peering in. There were more people outside than inside. At the center of the stage, 2 podiums stood, one for Climax, one for Glory Academy. Our opponent stood tall and confident, their leader a thin, sharp-faced girl named Justina. She was known for her quick tongue and sharp wit. The moderator tapped the microphone, and the hall went silent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the most anticipated debate of the year. Our topic, true or false? Fat ladies are generally more beautiful than thin ladies. The crowd roared, "Emily, Emily, Emily." My schoolmates chanted my name. I stepped forward, heart pounding, but my confidence soaring. I was ready to defend my kind. Justina from Glory Academy was the first to speak. She adjusted the microphone and smirked before beginning. "Good day, everyone. I am here to prove to you that the idea that fat women are more beautiful than thin women is a myth." Boos erupted from my schoolmates, but Justina wasn't shaken. She continued. "First of all, beauty is subjective. What one person finds beautiful, another may not. Secondly, history and modern media show that slim women dominate the beauty industry. Models? Slim. Beauty queens? Slim. Actresses? Slim. Even Cinderella in fairy tales? Slim. If fatness was the standard of beauty, why are thin women the ones always chosen?" The audience clapped. I felt Lucas squeeze my hand. But Justina wasn't done. And let's not forget the health aspect. Obesity is linked to diabetes, heart disease, and many other illnesses. How can something that threatens your life be called beautiful? Therefore, I conclude that thin ladies are generally more beautiful than fat ladies. Thank you. The hall erupted in mixed reactions. Some cheered. Some booed. But I stood tall. It was my turn. I stepped forward, adjusted the microphone, and smiled at the audience. "Good day, everyone." My voice was calm but firm. I am here to prove that fat ladies are generally more beautiful than thin ladies. I turned to Justina. My opponent claims that beauty is subjective. But if that were entirely true, then why do curvy women dominate the entertainment industry? Gasps filled the hall. "Let's go back to history," I continued. "Have you heard of Marilyn Monroe? She was a full-figured woman and was considered the most beautiful woman of her time. Have you heard of African queens like Queen Amina of Zazzau? In those days, a plump woman was the definition of beauty and wealth." Cheers erupted from my schoolmates. But let's even leave history and talk about today. Social media has brainwashed people into thinking that being skinny means being beautiful. Yet, on the streets, in the real world, when men look at a woman, what do they admire? Curves. Fullness. Presence. And who has that? Fat women. The hall erupted. "But most importantly," I said, lowering my voice so that the audience had to lean in, "beauty is not only about the body. It is about grace, intelligence, charisma, and confidence. And we, the full-figured women, carry all these with pride." I turned to Justina, smiling. "And to answer your final point, let me remind you that slim people also get sick. Slim people get diabetes. Slim people get heart disease. Health is about lifestyle, not size." The room exploded. Cheers. Claps. Whistles. Stomping feet. I had won the crowd. I turned to the judges and smiled. "I rest my case." The judges took their time. Discussions. Score calculations. Tension in the air. And then, the announcement. The winner of the Climax vs. Glory Academy debate is Climax School of Science. The hall erupted. Lucas rushed forward and lifted me in the air, spinning me around. "You did it, Emily." And in that moment, I felt unstoppable. Little did I know that years later, those very words I spoke on stage would come back to haunt me. For 7 years, Lucas and I lived in a comfortable routine, buried in books, chasing degrees, and barely having time for social interactions. We were both bookworms, equally obsessed with our studies. By the time I completed my pharmacy degree, Lucas had already finished his master's in mechanical engineering. And then, fate smiled at us. We were both posted to the same state for our National Youth Service Corps, NYSC. For the first time in years, we had the luxury of time to truly be together, to rediscover the friendship that had started back in secondary school. The spark was still there. In the evenings after our service duties, we would sit by the roadside, eating roasted corn and laughing about old memories. We talked about the future, our wedding, our children, our dreams. 2 years after our service year, we made it official. We got married. I believed with all my heart that Lucas and I would live happily ever after. I was wrong. At first, our marriage was a dream. Lucas secured a job at a foreign-based automobile company, and I got employed at a national hospital as a certified pharmacist. We were young, brilliant, and full of hope. I woke up every morning with gratitude, praying that nothing would ruin the beautiful life we had built together. But then, the change began. It started small. Subtle. So subtle I almost didn't notice. The first time I sensed something was wrong, it was during dinner one night. I had cooked one of Lucas's favorite meals, pounded yam and agusi soup, just the way he loved it, with well-seasoned goat meat. As we sat at the table, I smiled and served him. But instead of digging in like he used to, he just stared at the food. Then, without looking at me, he muttered, "Emily, don't you think you eat too much these days?" The words sliced through me like a knife. I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. "I mean, you're getting bigger. Have you checked your weight lately?" I felt my hands tremble as I picked up my spoon. I forced a smile. "Lucas, we've been married for almost a year now. It's normal to gain a little weight. Please subscribe." He didn't respond. That was the first warning sign. I should have known it was only the beginning. Dirty first, it was just comments about my weight. Then, it became advice. "You should start going to the gym, Emily. Maybe cut down on carbs. Have you heard of keto?" I read somewhere that women who don't maintain their shape lose their husband's attention quickly. I laughed the first few times, thinking he was joking. But soon, the comments became cruel. One day, while dressing up for work, I caught Lucas staring at me with disgust. He sighed and muttered, "Emily, I miss how you looked in university. You were different." My hands froze on my zipper. I turned to him, my chest tightening. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "You used to be attractive. Now, you just," he hesitated, searching for the right words, but I already knew what he wanted to say. "Now, I was just fat." I stood in front of the mirror that night, staring at my reflection. For the first time, I hated what I saw. Maybe Lucas was right. Maybe I had changed too much. Maybe I wasn't beautiful anymore. That night, I made a decision. I was going to lose weight. Not for myself. For him. I signed up for a gym membership. I changed my diet. I stopped eating my favorite foods. Every morning, I ran until my legs ached. Every night, I did sit-ups until my stomach burned. I pushed myself, hoping, praying that Lucas would notice. That he would look at me the way he used to. That he would love me again. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. He never noticed. Or worse, when he did, he still wasn't satisfied. One evening, I walked into our bedroom, sweaty and exhausted from a 2-hour gym session. Lucas was sitting on the bed, scrolling through his phone. I smiled, wiping my forehead. "Guess how much weight I've lost this month?" He barely looked up. "Emily, this is useless," he said flatly. "You're still fat." I felt my heart shatter. Tears burned my eyes. I dropped my towel, my chest heaving. "Lucas, why are you doing this to me?" He finally looked up, his eyes cold. "Because I never wanted this." The words hit me like a thunderbolt. I gasped. "What?" He ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "Emily, I married you because I thought you'd stay the way you were. I thought you'd take care of yourself. But look at you now. You let yourself go." I stared at him in shock, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You mean, you married me for my looks?" My voice was barely a whisper. He scoffed. "Would you have married me if I was jobless? If I had no ambition? Women want a man who can provide. Men want a woman they can admire." Silence. Cold. Dead. I felt something inside me die. That night, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, realizing the truth. I had spent years trying to earn his love. But he never truly loved me. Not the real me. Not the Emily who was strong, intelligent, kind, and hardworking. He only wanted the pretty, plump teenage girl from secondary school. The one who wore expensive clothes and won beauty pageants. The Emily I could never be again. The next morning, I woke up feeling empty. For years, I had fought for Lucas's love. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to fight anymore. That was the day I made another decision. I was done chasing love. And soon, when Lucas least expected it, he would regret everything. Because someone else was about to enter my life. Someone who would love me just as I am. Please subscribe. It was a night like any other. Or at least, that's what I thought. I was sitting on the couch, exhausted from another day of work. My job as a pharmacist had become my only escape from the growing tension in my home. Lucas had been distant, colder than usual. He came home late, his breath reeking of beer and cigarettes. The same Lucas who once frowned at men who drank now drowned himself in alcohol. The same Lucas who used to hold my hand while we walked home from school now recoiled at my touch. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. He walked in, his face blank, his body stiff. In his hand was a white envelope. He tossed it onto the table in front of me. "Read it," he said. I blinked, confused. "What is it?" He didn't answer. I picked up the envelope, tore it open, and pulled out the papers inside. My eyes scanned the words, but for a moment, they didn't make sense. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce. I let out a sharp laugh, certain it was one of his cruel jokes. Lucas had a terrible sense of humor, but this? This was beyond ridiculous. "Lucas, you can't be serious," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't funny." He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. "I want a divorce, Emily," he said simply. The room went silent. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. My heart pounded in my chest. My fingers trembled as I dropped the paper on the table. You're joking, right?" My voice was barely above a whisper. He turned away from me, walking toward the bedroom without another word. That was the moment I knew. This was real. My marriage was over. From that night forward, Lucas stopped sharing the same bed with me. He moved into the guest room and locked the door every night. The man who once held me close, whispered sweet words in my ears, and promised to love me forever now treated me like a stranger. Worse still, he had become someone I didn't recognize. Lucas had never smoked a day in his life, but now, the house reeked of cigarettes. He had always been disciplined about his health, but now, he came home drunk almost every night. He started staying out late, sometimes never coming home at all. I begged him. Oh, how I begged. I reminded him of our love, our dreams, our struggles, everything we had fought for. But he was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. I had lost him long before that night. Lucas's parents came, desperate to talk sense into him. "Emily is your wife," his mother pleaded. "She is not just some woman you can throw away like garbage." My own mother knelt before him, tears in her eyes. "Being fat is not a disease," she cried. "It's in our blood, can't you see? Look at me." My weight didn't stop me from having a happy marriage. My husband loved me regardless. Why can't you love her the same way? Even his friends, men who had known him since childhood, came to talk to him. "Lucas, she is a good woman. What more do you want?" But his heart was already sealed shut. Nothing anyone said could reach him. His silence was like a deep, dark abyss. Cold. Empty. Merciless. On the day of our final divorce hearing, even the judge, a man who had seen countless marriages crumble, made a last attempt to change Lucas's mind. "Young man," he said, looking him straight in the eye. "Are you sure about this? Marriage is not a game. You don't throw away a good woman because of something as shallow as weight. Do you know how many men would kill for a wife like this?" For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in Lucas's eyes. Regret? Doubt? A second thought? But then, he shook his head. "I am sure, Your Honor." And just like that, it was over. A single stroke of a pen. 2 years of marriage, gone. My dreams, shattered. My heart, broken beyond repair. As I walked out of that courtroom, I felt like I was walking into a nightmare. I was alone. No husband. No child. Nothing but memories that burned like the fires of hell. That night, I sat alone in my empty apartment, staring at the ceiling. I tried to sleep, but a single thought tormented me. A memory from years ago. A voice from the past, echoing in my mind. "Emily, you better don't be deceived. I give you just 4 years before your bubble will burst. You will bloat like a flooded pumpkin. The eyes of everyone will open, including this blind lover of yours. And you, Lucas, you are carrying a load that will sink you." I gasped. That boy. The one Lucas and I had beaten so many years ago. I couldn't even remember his name anymore. But his words had come to pass. Exactly as he predicted. Lucas saw me differently. Lucas left me. My love story, the one I believed was written in the stars, had turned into a cruel joke. A prophecy that had taken years to unfold, but had come true nonetheless. And now, here I was. Alone. Empty. Broken. What was I supposed to do now? How do you rebuild yourself when the person you built your world around has walked away? How do you move on when love has left you scarred beyond recognition? I didn't have the answers. But I knew one thing. I would never be the same again. Never. Please subscribe.